Imagine you're looking at a map of the United States,
Okay.
and you point down to Florida, and you suddenly realize that historically, culturally, and even legally, it was actually never part of the country.
Wow.
Yeah, but now imagine that the official history books just went ahead and pretended it was anyway. Like
Mhm.
simply to make the national map look a bit better and to make the origin story sound more unified.
Just kind of smoothing over the reality.
Exactly. And that exact scenario, like a massive retroactive claiming of land and people, is actually what modern research suggests happened to one of the most famous bedrock nations of the ancient world.
The 12 tribes of Israel.
Yep, the 12 tribes. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at some seriously fascinating modern archaeological and textual research. And it asks a really dangerous question.
It really does. It's a premise that totally upends how we usually think about ancient history, you know?
Right, because we are taught to imagine these ancient kingdoms as having these solid, color-coded lines on a map.
Yeah, like this empire ends exactly here, and that kingdom begins exactly over there.
I mean, that's how it is in all the textbooks.
Right. And the story of the 12 tribes is usually presented as the ultimate cohesive family unit. You know, a clean, linear origin story of 12 fiercely loyal bloodlines conquering and sharing a specific land.
But what if one of those famous 12 tribes, like a literal cornerstone of this ancient nation, was essentially the victim of ancient identity reassignment?
Yeah, what if the ancient world was just as messy and porous and complicated in its border politics as our world is today?
So, today's mission for this deep dive is focused on the tribe of Asher. We're going to synthesize ancient geography, layers of biblical texts, actual dirt-level archaeology, and political history.
All to figure out who the Asherites actually were, because, as we'll see, the evidence strongly points to them not being Israelite at all.
Wait, really? Not at all.
Not at all. The evidence suggests they were actually Phoenician.
That is wild. Which means we are basically looking at how an entire population's cultural identity can be retroactively rewritten by a more powerful neighbor.
Exactly. And to understand who a people really were, you first have to look at where they lived.
You have to look at the ground they actually walked on.
Right. And when you look at the tribe of Asher, the geographic puzzle is the very first massive red flag.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the geography fundamentally contradicts the traditional Israelite origin story.
It really does.
Eh,
If you look at the early cultural heartland of Israel, like the bedrock where their society actually formed, it is located in the Central Highlands.
Up in the mountains.
Yeah, it's rocky, it's highly agrarian, and it's super isolated up in those hills.
Just subsistence farmers, right?
Exactly. People carving out terraces just to grow olives and wheat. But Asher's allotted territory is nowhere near those highlands.
They are completely off that map.
Yeah, they're sitting right on the beach, squarely along the Phoenician coast.
We are talking about the Western Galilee. Specifically, that coastal strip sandwiched right between the major Phoenician powerhouse city of Tyre and the city of Akko.
Right.
And the ancient texts, like in the book of Joshua, they actually list out the specific cities assigned to Asher. It's Akko, Aksiv, Helba, Aphik, Rehob, Hammon, and Cana.
And just looking at these on a map, they are totally embedded in the maritime, seafaring culture of the Mediterranean coast.
And, I mean, in the ancient world, geography dictates pretty much everything else.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely. Your culture, your economy, your foreign relations, all of it. These cities were strategically located maritime hubs.
So they weren't farming olives.
No, not at all. Their daily lives, their trade routes, their entire economic existence relied on the sea, which means they were inextricably tied to the great Phoenician merchant cities of Tyre and Sidon.
Who were basically the masters of the Mediterranean back then.
Yeah, they were famous for their cedar timber trade and that highly prized purple dye. So, geographically speaking, Asher is not just sitting next door to Phoenicia. It is physically operating inside of its economic engine.
Okay, so if their daily reality is completely anchored in Phoenician geography and economics, we have to ask what their own foundational text, the biblical record, actually says about them.
Right, and this is where we find a genuinely bizarre clue in the book of Judges.
Yeah, because when the early texts describe the Israelite conquest of the land, they use a very specific, boastful formula, don't they?
They do. Usually the text says something like, the Canaanites dwell among the Israelites.
That phrasing feels really deliberate.
It is. It means Israel is the dominant force. They are the landlords, basically, and the local Canaanites are just permitted to live under their rule.
It's a narrative of clear dominance.
Exactly. The Israelites are dictating the terms of the land.
But when the text gets to Asher, this is in Judges chapter 1, verses 31 and 32, there is a massive grammatical reversal.
There's a huge shift.
The text openly admits that Asher failed to drive out the inhabitants of Akko and the surrounding coastal cities. Instead, it literally says the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites.
That is a stunning admission of weakness in a document that is generally designed to project strength and divine favor.
It's basically confessing that the locals are in charge.
Yeah, by flipping that formula, the text is confessing that the local Canaanite and Phoenician population is the dominant culture.
Yeah.
And the people of Asher are just sort of existing within it.
And it goes way beyond just that one verse, too. If you look at the rest of the early biblical texts, Asher is practically a ghost.
Totally invisible.
Like if you read the Judges cycle, which are the stories of Israel's early tribal warlords and heroes before they ever had King's Asher barely registers at all.
They're missing from the major battles. They really don't show up in the later core narratives of Samuel and Kings in any meaningful way either.
They're just peripheral to the national story. But, I mean, a careful historian has to ask, does a text admitting weakness automatically mean these people weren't Israelites?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, a traditionalist might argue that Asher was simply an isolated, weak outpost of Israelites. Maybe they were just highland farmers who migrated down to the coast, got in way over their heads, and were just struggling to maintain their Israelite identity while surrounded by this massive Phoenician majority.
And that is a really fair counter-argument. You have to
Right.
consider that.
Right, because if the written text is that murky and contradictory, we can't just rely on the scribes. We have to actually look at the physical earth.
We have to dig.
Yeah. If the Asherites were just a struggling Israelite outpost on the coast, the trash they left behind should reflect that struggle, right? So what does the actual dirt in the Western Galilee reveal?
Well, this is where we shift from literature to hard archaeological science. When archaeologists excavate these coastal Asherite cities, sites like Aksiv, Kabri, Tel Regev, and Tel Kaizen, they know exactly what the markers of an early Israelite settlement look like.
They know what to look for.
Right. And what they actually find in the ground is a completely, unequivocally Phoenician material culture.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's break down how they know the difference. Because it is one thing to say, this looks Phoenician, but how do archaeologists actually separate a struggling Israelite outpost from a genuinely foreign city?
It comes down to separating luxury imports from everyday utilitarian life.
What do you mean?
Well, let's start with pottery, which is basically the fingerprint of the ancient world. In these Asherite cities, the ground is completely saturated with Phoenician bichromeware.
Bichromeware.
Yeah, it's a very distinctive two-color painted pottery, and they also find imported goods from Cyprus and the Aegean Islands.
Okay, but you could argue those are just trade goods, right?
Right.
They're a port city. Of course they have import.
Exactly, but what archaeologists really look for is the cheap, everyday cooking pots.
The stuff regular people use.
Yes. Early Israelite sites are defined by a very specific, undecorated utilitarian pottery. But in Asher's territory, that baseline Israelite pottery is practically non-existent. They're cooking with Phoenician pots.
Wow. And the houses they are cooking in don't match up either, do they?
No, not at all. The absolute hallmark of an early Israelite settlement is something called the four-room house.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it is this very specific architectural layout featuring a pillared courtyard. It was specifically designed to accommodate highland terrace farmers who needed to keep their livestock on the ground floor.
So you find those everywhere in the Israelite highlands.
Everywhere. But in Asher's territory, there is an utter absence of four-room houses. They are building straight-up Phoenician-style structures.
That is super telling. And we also have to talk about zooarchaeology, right? The animal bones left in their trash pits.
Oh, absolutely. Diet is one of the most stubborn indicators of cultural and religious identity.
Yeah, people don't change what they eat easily.
No, they don't. And the early Israelites famously practiced a strict avoidance of pork. It was a foundational food taboo that clearly delineated them from the Philistines and the Canaanites.
Right. So if you excavate an early Israelite highland village, you will find basically zero pig bones.
Zero. But in the excavations of these Asherite coastal cities, there is absolutely no evidence of Israelite food taboos.
They're eating pork.
Lots of it. They're eating plenty of pork, along with a heavy maritime diet of fish that matches the coastal Phoenicians perfectly.
Which brings us to the ultimate cultural marker, religion. If they were an Israelite outpost, we should find early Yahwistic markers, shouldn't we?
We really should, meaning we should find altars or inscriptions or religious symbols dedicated to Yahweh, the God of Israel.
But the archaeologists are pulling up. What?
They're pulling up Phoenician standing stones and coastal Canaanite religious figurines. The dirt is completely silent on the God of Israel.
The dirt is completely silent. That is a powerful image.
Yeah, the archaeological profile really leaves almost no room for debate. From the foundations of their architecture, to the bones in their trash, to the idols on their shelves, the daily reality of these people was entirely Phoenician.
I want to push back on this just a little bit, though, because human behavior is endlessly adaptable.
Okay, sure.
Is there any possibility that these were originally Israelites who just fully assimilated?
Like they just went native.
Yeah. Like, what if they were wealthy Israelite merchants who moved to the coast, completely bought into the cosmopolitan lifestyle, and just adopted the local culture? Like an ancient version of moving to Paris and suddenly eating baguettes and wearing berets? How do we know they weren't just trendy Israelites?
Well, it is a necessary question to ask.
Yeah.
But archaeologists rule that out by looking for transitional phases.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if a group of Israelites moved to the coast and slowly assimilated, the dirt would show a timeline of that transition.
Right, the older layers would look different.
Exactly. The lowest layers of the dig would show those Israelite four-room houses and cheap Israelite cooking pots. And then over time, you would see the introduction of Phoenician goods as they assimilated.
But we don't see that.
We don't. In the territory of Asher, there is no underlying baseline Israelite culture to suggest they were ever Israelites to begin with. The culture is Phoenician from the bedrock up.
So, geographically, they are embedded in Phoenicia, and the dirt proves their daily lives were entirely Phoenician.
Yes.
If the people living in Asher's territory ate, built, and worshipped like foreigners, how did the actual Israelite monarchy treat them?
Ah, that's where the politics come in.
Right. Did the kings in Jerusalem view them as loyal citizens, or did they treat them like a foreign piggy bank?
To answer that, we have to look at the politics of ancient real estate. Specifically, a really fascinating diplomatic incident recorded in the book of 1 Kings chapter 9.
Okay, set the scene for us.
At this point in the biblical timeline, King Solomon is constructing the great temple and his royal palace in Jerusalem.
Massive construction projects.
Huge. And to pull off these massive projects, he relies heavily on imported cedar timber and skilled craftsmen from Hiram, the king of Tyre.
Who is essentially the ultimate Phoenician powerhouse of the era. Solomon is clearly the junior economic partner in this relationship. But
Unquestionably, Solomon's massive building ambitions put the Israelite kingdom deep into debt to Hiram. And the text tells us that to settle this royal account, Solomon gives Hiram a gift. He officially hands over 20 cities in the land of the Galilee.
and let me guess, those 20 cities just happen to be sitting right in Asher's allotted territory.
You guessed it, right in that exact Phoenician cultural zone we have been examining.
So what does this all mean? The text then notes that Hiram comes down from Tyre to inspect his newly acquired real estate, doesn't it?
It does. He tours these 20 cities, and he is deeply unimpressed.
Really?
Yeah, he actually names the area Eretz Kabul, which roughly translates to good-for-nothing or worthless land.
That is such a strange detail to include in the official royal history.
It really is.
But if we look at the politics of this, a monarch doesn't just hand over a core pillar of his eternal unified nation.
No, absolutely not.
It's like a CEO selling off a subsidiary company to pay down corporate debt. You only do that if that branch isn't actually core to your main business, or like a country trading away an entire state to settle a trade dispute. If Solomon genuinely viewed the tribe of Asher as his own blood, as part of the chosen people, he wouldn't use them to settle a lumber invoice. Doesn't this transaction essentially prove that the Israelite monarchy viewed this population as highly negotiable assets rather than actual citizens?
It really highlights that Israelite control over this coastal strip was, at best, incredibly nominal.
So they were just sort of claiming it on paper.
Yeah, the monarchy in Jerusalem clearly didn't view these cities as central to Israel's national identity or its core agrarian economy. Solomon could transfer them on paper because their identity was already fluid and their economy was already fully aligned with Tyre anyway.
And Hiram calling it worthless land makes a lot of sense in that context, too.
How so?
Well, if the people living in those 20 cities were already culturally Phoenician, already trading with Tyre, and already operating in Hiram's economic sphere, Then Solomon giving Hiram the official political title to the land didn't actually give Hiram anything he didn't already essentially control.
Oh, that's a great
It
point.
was purely a paper transaction.
Exactly. It likely didn't change the daily lives of the people living there at all.
But this brings us to the massive, glaring contradiction at the center of this whole deep dive.
Let's hear it.
The Israelite kings clearly treat them as expendable border towns. The archaeologists have proven the dirt is totally devoid of Israelite culture. Their geography puts them squarely in another country's territory.
Yep.
So why on earth are they listed as one of the famously unified 12 tribes of Israel in the Bible?
Right. To understand how a foreign population gets permanently drafted into another nation's origin story, we have to look at a concept historians call ethnogenesis.
Ethnogenesis. Okay, let's break down how that actually works in practice.
So ethnogenesis refers to the deliberate construction or the birth of an ethnic identity.
Okay.
It is the idea that national identities are rarely born overnight from a single family tree. Instead, they are negotiated, they're merged, and they're often retrofitted over centuries.
So it's a messy process.
Very messy. When we talk about the Iron Age Levant, the period when these kingdoms were forming after older empires collapsed, we are talking about a highly unstable time. Small local groups were scrambling to form solid alliances and identities just to survive.
So how did the scribes actually retrofit the history of Asher? Did they just invent a tribe out of thin air?
No, it is more about merging and rebranding. Modern scholars, people like Finkelstein and Dever, they argue that the rigid concept of the 12 tribes was largely a literary and ideological framework.
So it wasn't a literal snapshot of history.
No, it was finalized much later in Israel's history, likely during the later years of the monarchy, around the time of King Josiah.
Ah, okay.
The kingdom was fractured at that time. They were facing massive threats from empires like Assyria and Babylon, and the centralized power in Jerusalem desperately needed to compile these texts to project a glorious, unified past.
Oh, I see. They needed a PR campaign to make the kingdom look bigger, older, and more cohesive than it actually was.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is very much like your corporate merger analogy from earlier.
Right.
As the Israelite kingdom grew and exerted whatever nominal political influence it could over the Galilee region, they absorbed this coastal Phoenician population on paper.
They essentially acquired the territory, slapped the Israelite logo on the side of the building, and integrated them into the national paperwork.
Exactly.
And the number 12 is deeply symbolic in the ancient world, right?
Oh, very much so.
It represents completeness, like 12 months in a year. So they needed 12 genealogical slots to make the national story perfectly symmetrical.
Yes, ideological completeness.
So they pointed to this messy, porous border region on the coast, pointed to the Phoenicians living there, and basically said, you are tribe number 8, you are Asher. Even though the employees inside the building were still doing business the exact same way they always had.
That model beautifully resolves all the contradictions we've spent this deep dive exploring.
It really does tie it all together.
It explains why the dirt reveals a purely Phoenician material culture. It explains why the earliest biblical texts contain awkward hints of a weak Israelite presence where they dwelt among the Canaanites.
Right.
It explains the political fluidity of Solomon treating the land as a tradable commodity, and it perfectly explains the geographic reality of their coastal location. Asher was a border population with a dual identity, existing in a space where ancient categories simply didn't map onto our modern expectation of rigid borders.
But wait, if the biblical scribes were retrofitting the texts to create this perfect PR campaign of a unified nation, why would they leave in the embarrassing details?
What do you mean?
Like, why leave in the verse where Asher fails to conquer Akko? Or the story where Solomon just gives the land away to pay a debt? Doesn't that totally undermine their own propaganda?
That is the beauty of how ancient texts were compiled. The biblical authors weren't just writing fiction from scratch.
They were working with existing material.
Exactly. They were weaving together older oral traditions, fragmented court records, and local memories into a new overarching framework.
Okay, I follow.
Those older memories, the memory that Asher was weak, the historical record of Solomon's land deal, those were just too well known to simply erase.
People would have noticed if they just deleted them.
Right. So the scribes preserved those awkward historical kernels, but forced them into the newly constructed, color-coded map of the 12 tribes.
It seems like being Israelite or Phoenician in that era wasn't about a strict DNA test. And it wasn't about having a specific passport.
Not at all.
It was about these overlapping cultural spheres, economic ties, and ultimately political branding. Was the inclusion of Asher basically just ancient political propaganda to create a unified national origin story?
We connect this to the bigger picture, yeah. History is almost always written by the centralized power to project unity backward into the past.
They need it to look neat and tidy.
Yeah, they take the chaotic reality of human interaction, where people are trading, intermarrying, and sharing customs across porous borders, and they just draw solid lines right over them.
We really want the historical X-ray to show a clean break between us and them.
But the reality is completely murky.
Which brings us back to you listening to this right now. We have dug through ancient coastal geography, examined the microscopic differences in everyday cooking pots, analyzed royal debt negotiations, and uncovered how ancient scribes essentially executed a corporate merger on paper.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did, but why does the true identity of the tribe of Asher actually matter today? It matters because the story of Asher forces us to look in the mirror. It forces us to question how we construct our own modern narratives of who belongs and who doesn't. It makes us realize how much of the rigid, monolithic history we are taught in school, like those solid lines on the maps we memorize, are actually just borders drawn long after the fact by whoever happened to hold the pen.
Right.
The identities we think are set in stone are incredibly fluid.
It is a vital lens for critical thinking. When we recognize how ancient scribes retrofitted reality to serve an ideological framework, it leaves us with something crucial to consider as we consume information today.
What's that?
Well, if Asher's true cultural identity, their daily times, the homes they built, their actual heritage, was essentially overridden and absorbed by the literary framework of a stronger neighbor, what other ancient or even modern groups have had their true origins scrubbed from the historical record simply because they lived on a porous, inconvenient border?